welcome, welcome. Happy Hunger Games! And may the odds be ever in your favor. Now, before we begin,
you need to download and save as the Layers Raw and Layers Raw 2 PSD files into your OneDrive folder, and I need to stop talking in that ridiculous accent. So, just a reminder that anytime I'm going to give you a Photoshop document to work along with, in order to save that to your OneDrive folder, you're going to find the Photoshop document, right-click, and choose Save Link As. That way you'll be able to use your File Explorer to go to your OneDrive folder, your graphic design folder, and whatever unit we happen to be in. As long as you see the file name correctly and the Save As type as Photoshop, you should be able to choose Save. So make sure you're saving Layers Raw and Layers Raw 2 to your OneDrive folder, graphic design, and whatever unit we happen to be in. Then head over to Photoshop and open both of those files in your Photoshop workspace. Remember, when Photoshop opens 2 or more pictures, you're going to see them as individual tabs at the top of your screen, just as if you were using an internet browser. Make sure that you click on the tab Layers_Raw, because that's where we're going to start today. In today's video, you're going to learn all about the Layers panel, which should be located down here on the right side of your screen. If you don't see the Layers panel, we need to open that up by going to Window and making sure that you have Layers checked, and it should appear down here at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. In today's video, we're going to learn all about what this Layers panel includes, in addition to how to create layers, how to view or hide layers, rearrange layers, link layers, flatten layers, and finally, how to add different layer effects. Before we can do any of that, we need to understand what layers are. In this first example, I'm going to start with a white background that I'm going to draw a green O onto and 2 black eyes. Forgive my horrible artistic skills. Now I'm going to want to move one of these black eyes. So in order to do that, I have to take a scissors and cut out the black eye before I can move it. Now I'm left with a gross hole. In my second example, I've separated the O as a sticker and the 2 little eyes as individual pieces. This way, when I move them, I'm not ruining my white background or any other parts of my picture, and I can do whatever I want with the individual pieces. Layers in Photoshop work the same way as the second example. When you're creating your documents, you're going to be creating them in separate individual layers or editable individual pieces, so that when you need to make any changes, you're not going to ruin the other parts of your picture. So we're going to practice learning about layers by using the Layers Raw file that you should have open. And if I take a look at the Layers panel in the Layers Raw file, I actually have 5 layers in this picture. I've got the background layer, paper texture, the letter layer, the shell layer, and the 2 layer. Now at this point, I can tell that I have the background layer selected because it's highlighted in gray. Now if I clicked on the letter layer, that letter layer would be selected because that's highlighted. I can also only see this blue background layer right now because it's the only layer that has this little eye next to it. So if I click the eye, I'm no longer going to be able to see that layer. And if I go up to the paper texture and click where that eye is, all of a sudden I can see that. So this little eye indicates visibility of our layer. So go ahead and make sure that you have all of your layers visible by seeing the little eyes. The next thing we need to notice is that all of our layers have names on them. So it's super important for you to always name the layers on your pictures. because while there is these small little thumbnails next to each layer that kind of show you what they are, sometimes you'll have something that's really, really tiny on your layer that you can't see in the thumbnail. So you'll always want to have it named specifically. Now, naming a layer is really, really easy, and it's done by just double clicking on the text of that layer's name. So I want you to double click into the letter layer and rename it envelope. And to save the name, you just press enter. Now, the order of our layers in our layer panel is super important. Think of this like you are carrying around a stack of papers. In this example, the background layer is our bottom paper on our stack because it's at the bottom of the layers panel. The to layer is the top paper in our stack because it's at the top of the layers panel. I'm not able to see parts of layers that are covered up by a higher stacked layer. So for example, I can't see the paper texture or background that's covered up by the envelope layer because it's on top of them in the layers panel. Now I can move around the order of my layers very simply by clicking and dragging them. However, it is so important that anytime you want to edit that specific layer, it has to be selected. So if I have the paper texture layer selected, but I'm actually trying to paint my shell layer, it's not going to work. So if I go over to the brush and I try to paint my shell right now, it's not working. It's actually painting my paper texture because that's the layer I have selected in my layers panel. If I go to my history panel and I step backwards and I actually select the shell layer and now go paint on it, it's going to work because I have that layer selected. So it's always super important for you to first select the layer you want to edit. Now let's pretend that I want to move my paper texture on top of my envelope layer so that I can see more of it. Simply click and drag your paper texture, and wherever you see the double bar is where that paper texture layer is going to go. So right now I want you to click and drag your paper texture so that it's in between shell and envelope. And you're going to notice that now the paper texture is covering up the part of the envelope because it is on top of that layer in the layers panel. Another thing you might notice in our layers panel right now is that the background layer has this lock icon next to it. And that means that the layer is locked or it is partially locked. And that means it's unable to be edited. So to lock a layer to not be able to be edited, again, first select the layer, and we're going to practice this by locking the shell layer. So select the shell layer, and then you should see this little icon that looks like the lock. And if you click that, you're going to see that the shell is now locked. You could also bring up the lock icon by right-clicking on the layer, and you'll see you get a bunch of options this way if you can't ever find your icons on top. So if I tried to go over to the brush tool and paint on the shell, it's not going to let me in. It says could not use the brush tool because the layer is locked. So if I wanted to unlock it, I simply unclick the little lock, and then I'd be able to edit that layer. However, I do want you to keep the shell layer locked down. I can also link layers together, which is kind of like putting them in handcuffs. So imagine two people handcuffed together. They have to move together. If I link two layers together, they're going to be edited or moved together. So let's go ahead and practice linking our envelope and our paper texture layer. And the first step to linking them is making sure that I select both layers that I want to link. So to select multiple files, first click your first layer that you want to link, then press and hold Control and click the second layer you want to link. So now that I have both paper texture and envelope selected, the link button looks like two little handcuffs down here. And if you go ahead and click that, they'll now show two little handcuffs side by side. So one new tool I want to introduce to you at this point is what's called the Move tool. If I go over to my toolbox, it looks like this four-pointed compass. Now if I click that, that allows me to move around whatever layer I have selected. So because I have paper and envelope linked, it should move both when I click and drag. And it does. It lets me move both and they're moving together. So link the paper texture and envelope and move them somewhere around on your paper. You can also delete layers that you might not like at all. So let's say that I really could care less for this two layer. I need to first select it so that I know that's the one I'm deleting. And then if you go down to the little trash can in the right hand corner it'll say, do you want to delete? And I can say yes, and 2 is no longer there. Opposite of delete is to create a brand new layer to hold something that I want in it. And that looks like this little sticky note at the bottom. So if I click the sticky note, it's going to create a brand new layer for me. And the first thing that you always want to do is rename that layer. I'm just going to call it brush. And then I want you to go out, and I don't care what you do, but draw some sort of brush item on your brush layer that, again, now if you moved around is completely by itself. Now there are a couple different ways you can change the appearance of your layer. And the first is by changing our layer's blending mode, and that's located on this box right here. You're going to see that on the brushes layer blending mode, it's normal, as are all the rest of them right now. But I want you to practice changing the blending mode. So go ahead and on your brush layer, click that drop down menu and choose something different. And you can go through and you'll see that it really changes depending on what you choose. So I don't care what you choose for your blending mode. I just want you to change the blending mode of your brush layer. The second way to change the way your layer appears is by using this opacity. And we're going to change the opacity of our envelope layer. So select your envelope layer, and opacity is how transparent the layer is. So the higher the opacity, the less transparent. Now if I drag this down, you're going to see that the more see-through that envelope layer is because it is less opaque. And you can type in a number that you want to and change that opacity of the envelope layer. The last way to change a layer's appearance is through the effects option, and this is the most intense way. And we're going to practice doing that on our shell layer. So the first thing we actually have to do is unlock the shell layer, or it's not going to let us add an effect. So unlock your shell layer, and then the effects layer is this button down here that says FX, and that's because if you say FX really fast, effects, it sounds like the word effects. Ha! So if you click the FX button, you're going to see you have a ton of different ways you can change your layer's appearance. So the first one I actually want to show you is this color overlay. So when you click any of the effects, it's going to bring up this whole box that you can move around so that you can see it. And I always like to make sure that I have this preview box checked so I can see what it would look like. Now, right now, the color overlay is changing the color of my shell to gray. So if I clicked in here and maybe I wanted it super bright green, I would see that it's changing my shell to bright green. My blend mode is normal, but if I change this as well, I can now also change the way my layers appeared. So this is one way for you to actually change the color of part of your picture. And as you see over here on the left, anytime you add a layer effect, it just does a check mark. So I can actually add multiple ones. So I could go to drop shadow, and now I have a drop shadow. I have a whole bunch of options that I can change on my effects boxes. And when I click OK, any effect that I've applied is shown underneath my layer. And I can make those effects visible and non-visible, just like I could turn the layer's visibility on and off. And if I wanted to edit it, so let's say I wanted to change the color, I just double click my color overlay and it will let me edit that effect. So I could maybe say, ooh, I actually want my shell purple, and I could make my shell purple. So I want you to practice adding multiple effects to your shell layer. The last thing we're going to learn how to do is how to add other pictures onto our current picture in their own layer. So you should have layers_raw2 open, and to put that onto a different picture, or in this case our layers raw picture, it's super, super easy. I just need to make sure that I'm on the move tool because I'm moving it to my layers raw folder. And then I'm going to click and drag up to the layers raw tab. Now I need to wait until I see where it shows the plus on the cursor. Otherwise it's not going to work. So as soon as I see that plus, I can let go, and I'm going to see that Photoshop has imported this as its own layer for me. And again, double click, rename this layer photo, hit enter. And I want you to move it somewhere on your page, and I want your order for it to be underneath your shell layer. Now, sometimes when you bring in another picture onto the one that you're editing, it can be a really wonky size and you want to make it bigger or smaller, or maybe you even want to rotate it. And you can do that to any piece of your picture that you have as a separate layer. And that is called transforming. And so we're going to use a shortcut key to transform. And that is done by, again, first making sure you're on the layer you want to transform. So we're going to transform this photo layer. So click on photo. And then you're going to do the shortcut key of Control T, because transform starts with T. And you're going to see it has this little boxes around it, which you can simply click and drag to make it bigger or smaller. If you hover your mouse around the corner of the box, it'll bring up a double-headed arrow that lets you rotate it if you turn your mouse. Or if you're on the sides, if you click and drag to the opposite side, it will flip the picture. Once you're happy with how you've transformed the picture, you need to go up to the tool options bar and choose check for yes, okay? Or you can hit the enter button. If you don't like it, you want to hit this cancel button and it'll put it back to the way it was. So again, Control T, and you can transform this photo picture however you want. I'd like you to make it either bigger or smaller, and then I'd like you to practice rotating it in some fashion. And then remember to accept or confirm your transformation. At this point, we should see the following in our layers panel. We practiced deleting the number 2 layer, creating a new layer that we painted our brush in and named it brush, adding a couple effects to our shell layer, adding in the photo layer, moving the paper texture layer above the envelope layer, and renaming that letter layer to envelope. If you have all of those things done, we are going to save this layers raw as a PSD. And the reason we need to do the file save as and keep it as a Photoshop document is because layers are only accessible in Photoshop. So if I forget to save this as a Photoshop document and only save it as a JPEG picture, I'm never going to be able to see all my layers again and go back and edit it. And that really sucks. So that's why we always practice saving one version as PSD so we could go back and edit our layers if necessary. And it will ask, do I want to replace it because we've made changes? And go ahead and choose yes. And then this box comes up and you can choose don't show again and click OK. What you're submitting to Schoology for me is the layers raw PSD version, because I'm going to open up it in Photoshop to make sure that you have made all these edits to these layers.